be surprised. I have to put to you the findings of this being called a devastating or damning report. To my listeners now, many of whom possibly have lost loved ones, and it would appear that it's a rather toxic mix of government inaction and scientific advice. What do you say? Good morning.
Well, good morning, Nick. Obviously, the report came out at midnight, so I've not had an opportunity to read it as yet. But what we did throughout the pandemic was to follow the scientific advice. Obviously, what we know now about that unprecedented event is different to what we did at the start, but we got the vaccine deployed. We protected the NHS from the surge we saw in other countries. But what happened to individual families was obviously devastating, and a devastating personal loss. And our hearts go out to them. It was a global pandemic. It was an unprecedented time. And where there are lessons to learn from that is why we've committed to an inquiry to ensure that for those families, the right lessons are learned from that very difficult period.
Doesn't help if you've lost grandma, does it?
No, and I think...
So you can apologise for that, can you? Government's COVID mistakes have killed many thousands is one headline. Elderly were just an afterthought is another headline. And this is from a report by some of your colleagues, your own MPs. So you're able to apologise for that, aren't you?
No, I think we followed the scientific advice. Obviously, if there's
that wasn't respectfully, sir. That wasn't the question, Minister. Are you able to apologise?
Well, we need to look at the report. As I say, it's only just come out. We need to ensure that where there are lessons to learn. I don't, for a minute...
Might I politely ask you not to say lessons to be learnt again? That's 3 times we've heard lessons will be learnt. I'm just wondering why you find it unable to apologise.
Because we followed the scientific advice we had at the time, and the knowledge we had at that point... The knowledge we had at that point was very different. So on things like asymptomatic testing, what we now know is very different. Now, we did move quickly in response to the pandemic. We had guidance out to the social care sector in February of 2020. We had an action plan in April. We put in place support, £2.4 billion of support to social care through things like the infection control. We moved to protect our NHS. We got a vaccine deployed. We built from scratch a test and trace capacity.
You talk about moving. You also fatally moved elderly people into care homes, which killed them. All I'm asking for, I appreciate no one did it deliberately. You all worked damn hard. It would appear in many instances the advice that was flawed. I'm just asking on a human nature. Surely you apologise to my listeners who lost relatives.
Well, I recognise it's devastating, and my heart goes out to any family, any of your listeners where
Minister,
they lost a loved one.
What's so hard about the word sorry?
Because we followed the scientific advice that we had at the time, Nick, and
we'll move on in a minute. I mean, there's no point going on and on with this, Mr. Barclay, but on a human level, as Minister for the Cabinet Office, you can't apologise to people who lost loved ones.
Well, I'm saying if we followed the scientific advice and the knowledge we had at the time, Nick, that was a logical thing to do. But what we're committed to doing for those families is having an inquiry, ensuring that we address any issues from that time. But we followed the knowledge that we had at that time. We followed the advice that we had at that time, Nick.
And it was slightly... Right, but when they're not, you apologise. It's human nature, isn't it?
But what's inherent in, as I say, we need to look at this report, but what's inherent in it is did we take logical decisions based on the information that we had at that time?
So